Folks, we may have some bad news. This is a 2017 Toyota Prius. It's fourth generation, updated engine, the whole 9 yards, and everything is great. Previous generation Prius, third generation Prius, had all kinds of head gasket issues and just things were not pretty at some point. Well, supposedly this is the updated model. We don't have any issues anymore and everything, but this particular 17 Prius has every single symptom of a really bad head gasket leak, similar to the third generation Prius, with some things that are puzzling me. Let's dive into it. Let's see what we find here, because this thing is losing coolant faster than this intro. Let's get started. So here is the story of this car. This is a car we worked on a while back, probably 6 to 8 months ago, something like that. It had a problem where we couldn't fill it with fuel. We found a broken wire in the fuel containment valve. I don't remember the exact name for it, but that was very simple. Then it came in for a trans service. We did that. We haven't seen this car for a while. Then all of a sudden we get a call from the customer. Hey, my car is using coolant at a rapid rate. I mean, this thing, you drive it for a day, it loses so much coolant that there's no more heat. That's how bad this thing is. If you have a leak this big where you're dropping a gallon of coolant a day or plus, you have something massive leaking. Like, we're talking me taking a screwdriver and just slashing the radiator, for example. That's how big that leak would be. But this, it's been, when they dropped it off, I went to look underneath it. There's nothing, not a single drop of coolant, and that's why I'm really puzzled by this. And let's dive into it and find out. First thing on coolant diag or any leaks is we're going to pressurize the system, and this cap is not original. It's just, I don't know what happened there. We're going to pressure test the cooling system, and the idea is if you have a leak, first, you're going to know that you have a leak because the pressure is dropping. Second, you're going to actually see the leak because you're basically pushing the coolant out at this point. Kind of simulating what would happen when this car is fully running and fully pressurized. So, we're going to go 15 psi on this guy right here. That's usually what you should test these at. I got 15 psi. It's not dropping right away, but what we're going to do here is me and Jose will snooze. It'll be probably 10-15 minutes in real world. For you, it's going to be a couple seconds because we don't want to just keep chit-chatting about this. We'll be right back. Well, it hasn't even been not even 5 minutes. We're already down below 10 psi, and I hear a rushing sound. It's really loud, and the problem is I've been looking at this and I see literally nothing is leaking on the outside. I really looked at this off camera, but there's nothing leaking outside, and this is how the head gasket problems start. I'm going to leave this pressurized, even though it's probably get to 0. We're going to pull the spark plug. That's how you check it on the third generation Prius. You just pressurize it, pull the spark plugs, look inside with the camera. You literally see a dribble of coolant from where the head gasket is blown. So let's pull this one apart, and let's pull the spark plugs real quick, and we'll see what we see. That sound is intensifying. I mean, man, if this thing has a blown head gasket here, we're going to have a little pool of coolant from the way I'm hearing this, because I hear the rushing sound of coolant dripping, and it's kind of muffled and just a little strange. So I want to, if you own a 4th gen Prius, we're standing on our tippy toes right now to see, do we have head gasket problems again in the 4th generation Prius. Let's see if I'm able to get these coils out without removing the cowl completely. Probably not. So close. No, that's not going to happen. Supposedly because the third generation Prius, you have to remove the cowl to replace the spark plugs completely. Supposedly they made you a little access, but this one didn't get the cut. So we're going to have to pull this cowl out real quick. Because I just don't see anything else using this much coolant in no time. I'm really worried about this. Is this gonna be enough, or are we gonna have to completely remove this cowl? Let's see. Maybe. Yes. So we won't have to remove this cowl completely out. I guess it's better than the third gen to have a little bit more room. You don't have to pull the cowl completely out and the lower part, so that's okay. We can live with that. Now this does have the same 14mm spark plugs as the third generation Prius. It's technically a 2ZR, but it's an updated one. Let us see. Okay, let's... Okay, first spark plug. Doesn't look too bad. It is factory plug. Actually, I take that back. And I've seen better days, but we have bigger issues at the moment. We're gonna give bad news to fourth generation Prius owners. This one pretty much same thing. Usually it's cylinder number 2 that goes in the third gen, so these don't look bad at all. Same thing here. Pretty consistent so far, so there's a glimmer of hope. Let's see where our pressure is at. Oh, it's getting dangerously close to 0. Well, if this leaked this much into the cylinder, we'd probably have a little pull. Well, shall we have the moment of truth? All right, folks, moment of truth. We got our camera here. Let us go into cylinder number 1. Let's see where we're at. Oh, that is not good, folks. You see that? That is what I call a steam clean. That's not good, because what that is when you get coolant inside the cylinder, and whenever you see a piston that is sparkly clean compared to the rest, you got coolant inside the cylinder, and that coolant has water, and that water under the heat evaporates and literally pressure washer steam cleans the piston. What I am concerned about is I'm going to increase my pressure here because we're almost down to 0. Increase it back to 15. Although we're going to see the puddle here. This is not looking good. We're going to switch to our side camera here. We're going to look at the cylinder head, and I'm going to try my best to kind of point at it so you can see it. But I don't see any coolant on the head gasket here, which is well, this is not making sense. This does not make sense at all. This is steam cleaned. You see how clean, you can read the letters off of it. Let's look at another one. Maybe this one is not leaking as bad as some of the other ones, but this is not looking good, folks. So I can get the camera to go. The camera sometimes gives us a hard. This camera, I have seen so many engines that it's getting worn. Maybe it's time for a new one. There we go. Oh, this one is bad. Look at that. You can get a really good shot of that. This thing is steam cleaned. But I still don't see the puddle of coolant. For something that's leaking this bad, I should see a giant, like, puddle of coolant, which, let me spin this. I'm on camera. Cooperate. We're on our tippy toes here. Pretty clean cylinder wall ish. I don't see anything. There's no coolant here. Okay, well, that is just so strange. Like, you see it here. There's absolutely nothing. Okay, well, let's move to the next cylinder. There we go. Oh, this one is probably the worst one. Wait a second. This does not make sense. This does not make sense. No coolant. Let's switch it to the other side and look really close. It's absolutely not. I mean, that you see right there, there's a couple drips. These look like oil. Probably just from regular blow-by, but I don't see the amount of coolant that this leak is showing us. And now 3 cylinders out of 4. Oh wait, no. I see fuel here, probably from starting it and bringing it into the shop. But I don't see coolant. I mean, definitely not the amount that we're seeing in the pressure test. Let's look at the last cylinder here. Man, this is, wait a second. This doesn't make sense, folks. Coolant's getting inside the engine, but I don't see it. And this large amount, I mean, this thing already dropped below 10. Something is not, I don't like this. And this is where my diagnosis mind, you can't just look at signs and not take it all away. Where's the why? I have the what. Well, I have coolant in the cylinder. We're leaking coolant somewhere, usually head gasket, but you should see it. I'm not seeing it. This doesn't make sense. Coolant is making its way inside the cylinder, but not live. This doesn't make sense. Maybe when it warms up. This is an interesting one, folks, because we have a leak. We have a big leak. Now, when I drove this car, we're not going to drive it right now because we got it all apart already, but when I drove it, it smokes white, but it doesn't run rough. Usually with these head gaskets, when you pressure test them, because you'll have all kinds of coolant in the cylinder, you start them, they'll run really rough until they burn that coolant, and then they smooth out. Well, this one runs smooth, but it has white smoke, so this is an odd one. I don't think, I mean, there's something going on with the head gasket, potentially, but I'm not seeing it. Here's another way. Some of the tough third generation Prius head gasket leaks, if we take the exhaust manifold, or at least peek through, you'll see some coolant. You'll see one cylinder that is like wet and the rest of them are not, or one of them steam clean and the rest are not. Let's lift this thing up. I'm going to pressurize it again. Hopefully we'll see. Let's take a look underneath it, see what we see, because this is just not making sense at all. Okay, let's continue this mystery. This does not make sense, so we'll at least pull the end of the exhaust manifold and we'll see. You hear that? And as soon as I turned, I just saw it. Noise is right here. Oh, This was not a problem I've seen on these. Folks, 4th generation Prius has coolant going to the exhaust. I hear it dripping. And actually look here, there's literal coolant crust coming out of the exhaust. Is this thing leaking? This used to be an old 3rd generation Prius problem. It was not super common, but man, we're gonna have to see this. You know what I'm gonna do? Because it could also be the EGR cooler leaking. Let's take this, and I wanna look inside of here with a camera. Let's do that. Now, I'm gonna be ready. I have a feeling we may have a pool here. Oh, no. Oh. Oh. Well, hello, coolant. Every time you see this stuff, it's just hilarious. That is an alarming amount of coolant coming out of this exhaust. I mean, folks, I don't think this has a blown head gasket. Because if you have this much coolant coming through the head, through the cylinder head, through the exhaust, this thing won't run. And look at this. It's literally like I'm draining the radiator here. I literally have... Yeah, I don't think you have a blown head gasket here. But let's take a look inside. Oh, it smells so bad. It's like mixed up with exhaust gases and all kinds of goodies. But one thing distinct, it doesn't smell burned. Like it hasn't been through the combustion chamber. Let's get this exhaust out of the way. Yeah, this thing is loaded with coolant now. Oh yeah, there's all kinds of coolant coming here. I'm gonna fire up the camera and we're gonna take a look. This is now, I really hear it with this thing open. Hear that? Super loud now. I think that's what's leaking here, folks. And I'll explain to you how did that end up inside the cylinder head. Let's take a look here. I'm gonna set up my camera here. And I'm gonna take a little trip down the exhaust. Hold it. Oh, this thing is loaded with coolant. This thing is loaded with coolant. That's what's leaking, folks. See all that coolant? This is just amazing. The camera is actually submerged in coolant. Oh yeah, see that drip? I saw a drip. Well, we can't see any other drip, but it's literally leaking all over the place. It is dripping so bad. Folks, I think we figured it out. Oh, my camera now is full of coolant. This is great. Folks, I think what's leaking is the... this is such a terrible invention, in my opinion. So, you have... And same thing with the 3rd generation Prius. You have coolant going to the exhaust, to the catalytic converter, so it warmed the coolant, so this thing would get its emission certification. I think that's what's leaking. This is a lot of coolant, folks, that's coming out of the exhaust. This engine will never run if you have this much coolant in it. Explains the white smoke, doesn't explain why the coolant is getting in there. So I want to make sure of one thing. What I'm going to do here, we're going to still take the cat off the front, and I want to see if I mean, this is an alarming amount of coolant. I want to see if we have coolant there, because if we do, it may be an EGR cooler, although I just hear it right here, but I just want to make sure, because I don't like these pistons that are all washed. Let's take this exhaust out. Of course, that's fine. Go. And the moment of truth. Oh, that is extremely dry. I see nothing there, folks. Nothing. Literally nothing. I'm just gonna put my hand down there. Yeah, there's nothing. It's extra clean. Also looks a little steam clean. Yeah, I think we figured this one out. Yeah, a little repeating offender from the third generation Prius. Not as bad as the head gasket. The catalytic converter. It's leaking coolant. Sir, your exhaust is leaking coolant. That would be a very fun conversation with the customer. I have to admit that. But here is, I've had a chance now to process this a little bit and think about it. Why are we getting coolant inside the engine that steam cleans the pistons? Because that's also a concern of mine. And not one. It's usually one, two, and then the other ones will be normal. This one, all four of them. Here's what I'm thinking, and I might be way off, but hey, we try. You got this much coolant in the exhaust, some of it's gonna steam up. Here's what happens with these engines, even though they have EGR, and this is how they initially got out of EGR. When the piston is coming up on the exhaust stroke and it's pushing that exhaust gases out, when it starts coming down, it's programmed in the cam, in the way the lobes are. It hangs the exhaust valves open slightly, so it would pull some of that exhaust gas back in. It's for emission purposes, folks. So I'm thinking, with all this amount of steam that is already in the exhaust, when it's pulling it, it's actually pulling some of that steam back into the engine, and that's what's washing the pistons, not really head gasket leak, folks. This kind of diagnosis, now that I think about it, I'm like, how did I forget this? That this has this. We've seen this in the very early third generation Prius. This was somewhat of a common issue, but totally blanked out on this. But I can imagine anybody else looking at this, as soon as they put their camera in the cylinder, they see that pristinely clean piston that has been pressure washed. They'll just be like, yep, that gasket, let's roll. But you gotta, I just was not convinced, because the way it ran, it smoked white. Absolutely smoked white every time the engine starts. But it was because this was getting hot. It was just burning the coolant and throwing it out. But it ran fine. Usually with head gasket cars, I let it run so bad until they clear up the coolant in the cylinder. But this one, kind of throw us on a loop here, because it had a classic head gasket. When the customer called and made this appointment and I read it, I'm like, yeah, bad news. Fourth generation Prius has head gasket issues too. This is really, it was classic. I'm losing a alarming amount of coolant, car smoking white, I don't see puddles everywhere. This is classic. This is really bad news when you hear these three things. But when it showed up and it ran fine, I'm like, this doesn't make sense. And I wanted to investigate it with you guys to see, because this is really an odd one. But technically it's not, because we've actually seen this on the third gen Prius, but old problems coming back. Now, we're not going to say this is a common problem. It's actually the first one I see in the fourth gen, but if we get 10 of them in the next week, we'll call it a common problem. That's how common problems are when we talk about them in the videos or not. Well, this is a relief, but at the same time, it's kind of not, because this catalytic converter is a very expensive proposition. But at least the customer knows that we're not looking at an engine tear down and all kinds of stuff. Exhaust manifolds. I mean, you can't really tamper with this and put a jumper and kind of bypass this, because this is technically an emission device. But we're going to present the customer with the findings here, write them an estimate. I mean, at this point, we're pretty much two bolts, couple coolant hoses will drain the coolant, top it off and bleed it later, and sensor, and this thing is replaced. But we got to see what they want to do. In this case, honestly, I mean, this thing, you can't drive it like it's going to overheat and eventually wipe out the head gasket because it's been overheating, because it has no coolant. But at this point, I feel more comfortable. I think we're in the clear-ish. I'm going to still investigate a little bit, talk with the customer about, did this thing overheat? How long has this been going on? Because I'm going to kind of still give them the head gasket back row, because I don't know if they overheated it. They really didn't give me that information. So I'm going to proceed with this, hope for the best, that we don't have issues. But the good news is, for you, at least, not for the owner of this car, this thing looks very expensive, there is no head gasket issues with fourth generation Prius. At least those that we know about, or are super chronic, like the third generation Prius, where every other Prius comes in the shop is for a head gasket. That's just how it is with those, unfortunately. Folks, I hope you enjoyed coming along with this journey that almost went south. Because if I would have said, oh yeah, the pistons are steam cleaned, we got a head gasket, and just rush it and go through it and let's go, customer would have been, well, let's fix the head gasket. And you fix it, you go drive it, you don't really notice the coolant because it's not leaking coolant outside, takes it a while, or start smoking it, and now we're freaking out. This would have been a very bad situation, because we would have spent the money on the engine and then found nothing, and that would have been very bad. And then find out that it was this, and now we're spending a lot more money to replace this, and the customer would be like, are you guessing, or are we doing diagnosis here? And this is unfortunately a problem some mechanics go through, but you got to do your, when something doesn't make sense, follow that gut. I have a gut feeling when we're going through this, something ain't right, something's not making sense. I've seen so many places with head gaskets, usually you see the giant puddle, and this one didn't have it, and that's what alarmed me a little bit. Folks, I hope this video was helpful, informative. I hope you're doing something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.